Good evening. Can you hear me? I don't think it's on. Check 1, 2. All right. That works. Good evening and welcome to the Danvers Planning Board of August 1st, 2023. Tonight we're having a feedback session regarding multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA communities, new Section 3A of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, in which we aim to gather feedback from the public regarding the requirements of the MBTA communities and associated zoning amendments for the upcoming special town meeting. And Brian Zaleski is here to present from staff, planning staff. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to take my laptop up to here. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm actually really glad to see that almost every seat is filled here so far. So very happy to see that. My name is Brian Zackelli. I'm the Director of Planning. I've been here since January of this year. So the agenda for this evening is to talk very briefly about the purpose of this new state legislation, what happens if we don't comply. I'm going to go through the proposed district location and any modifications to the zoning bylaw that are going to potentially be presented at town meeting. So I'm going to go through all those potential changes. Well, then this says that it's the 4th that we're going to have feedback and discussion, but I think throughout the presentation, I'm going to periodically stop and ask for questions just while people have it fresh in their mind. So don't feel like you have to wait till the end for questions. I'll probably stop every few slides. Then go into the next steps in terms of after this meeting, where we're going to be going in terms of town meeting and the timeline moving forward. So the purpose of the new legislation, this is coming from the state. Also, am I blocking anybody here? Should I move this? Again, this is not coming out of the town of Danvers. This is straight the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The purpose of this new legislation is to address the housing crisis. Massachusetts has amongst the highest, fastest growing home prices and rents in the country, and these rising costs increase pressure and decrease health. So the goal is to create more and better access to work, services, schools, neighborhoods, restaurants, parks, and by building housing in and near walkable neighborhoods. It was also a goal of the Downtown Danvers Zoning Initiative in 2020 was to do essentially all of these things while trying to bring more housing to the downtown. So the legislation is trying to encourage MBTA communities to adopt these zoning districts where multifamily, which is defined as residents with 3 or more units. The Danvers currently does 4 units that's what it's considered multifamily. It has to be changed in this one district to 3+ units to be permitted as of right. This number is based on the need of creating about 200,000 new units by 2030 in the Boston metro region. So any questions about why the state feels that, why this is important? I can't really speak for the state, but I can tell you what they might say. Yes, please, right here. Well, I mean, I can, so it was based upon, the real need is based upon the need to create 200,000 new units in the Boston metro region. That's the main reason why this legislation was created. We basically have too many good jobs and not enough housing. Yes, sir.
Why is two-family not considered multifamily?
I think that the reason, short answer, I don't know. But the reason historically is that 2 families are typically either called 2 families or duplexes and are not, and the state wants to create more multifamily structures, meaning at least 3+. But in terms of why they picked 3 or 4, I couldn't tell you.
I would just hope that the planning board will do some investigating because 2 families would certainly help also.
I would agree. Mr. Bradstreet.
gets the final say?
If we want to comply, it's very clear they have the final say. If we want to comply with the law is 3.
So we have to elect different people.
So you had your hand up?
But the audience questions are not audible online.
A train station.
A train station or whatever, fairly said it, but we don't have a train station, we don't even have a bus stop.
I will get to that. There's different types of communities. There's transit communities, adjacent communities, and then adjacent small town. There's 3 types of communities. We're that middle one, the adjacent one, and I'm going to go into that a little bit later. Anything else about the state legislation? Sorry, she was, yep. Yes, please.
Yeah, can you help me understand the definition of zoning is permitted as of right? I hear it all the time.
Mhm.
And I don't quite understand what multifamily, 3-unit zoning permit as of right means.
Sure. Most of Danvers and most of the surrounding communities are generally single-family home communities. So the zoning allows only single-family homes in those zones. There's other zones that allow singles and 2s. And then there's others that allow three or more. So it's saying that out of all the zoning districts that you have in town, there has to be at least one zoning district. It could be very small. It doesn't have to take up, it has to be at least 50 acres. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But the idea is that there has to be a zone set up that will allow at least 3 family homes as of right, meaning that it's the use that is allowed. Just like a single-family home is allowed in a single-family zone, a 3-family home would be allowed in a 3-family home. When they say as of right, that means that if you meet all these conditions, you can just go get a building permit. As of right means, in your head, just building permit. That means you don't have to go to the ZBA, or you may have to go to the planning board, but generally, as of right means if you got all the ducks in a row, you're doing all the things that you have to do according to the laws, you can go get a building permit. Next question? Yes?
This could be further on in your presentation, but of that 200,000, what percentage does Danvers have? Are they assigning a certain percentage?
We will get into that. That's a very good question. So what happens if we don't comply? Who cares about this law anyway? This is a question that's actually get brought up a lot. So one, the state attorney general of Massachusetts has said that there's possible housing discrimination lawsuit against cities and towns that don't comply. That's one. One is we're not eligible for certain grant funding through the Local Capital Projects Fund, MassWorks, or the Community One-Stop app. So this is a decent amount of grant funding that we would not be allowed to even apply for. We're not eligible. So what types of funding are those? Why would we care about those types of funding? It's because the Local Capital Projects Fund, MassWorks, and the Community One-Stop, they give cities and towns money for complete streets design implementation, corridor studies, business improvement districts, all these things here, transportation demand plans, intersection safety improvements, a lot of things that every municipality wants. And currently, we've actually applied for about $110,000. We have interim compliance right now. It doesn't mean that we're going to comply in the future, but because we have interim compliance right now, we took it upon ourselves to use it and apply. So we applied for about $110,000, one for a transportation master plan that would look at the entirety of Danvers, and the other is a downtown mobility plan that we're working with the Disability Access Commission with. Any questions about non-compliance? Sir?
My major question is, after I looked at this write-up, is the only reason we're into this compliance is because we belong to the MBTA system. We're one of the communities that joined later than the original concept was developed. And we have had studies in the past option that we as a town have is to get a petition to the legislature and withdraw from the MBTA system altogether, because this is not a recommended option for the town. It's dictated to the town. So that's my major objection to this, and this has not been discussed in the past that I have seen.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear a question.
Well-
Question is, how can we withdraw from the MBTA concept? That's the question.
Follow-up question. Why would we want to?
Well,
Because
well, hold.
Well,
I'll let Jim.
staff is kind of doing a freewheeling meeting, as you notice. People are not identifying themselves. They're not saying who they are. So he's kind of making a Q&A. I think if we get more information, maybe complete your presentation and then do the questions at the end, because it's a little bit, it's going a little off the rails. But I think Mr. Zubrick's question, the reason why we comply is because we did the zoning downtown already. So as Mr. Brian's going to tell you that we're already pretty much there. So to jump out at this point doesn't make a lot of sense. But why don't we have him complete his presentation, and then we can ask questions at the end. And typically, once he sits down, people can get up and identify themselves, because this meeting is recorded. It is public access television, and we do have one member who's at home. So I think, Brian, if you could, why don't we have you continue to present, and maybe we'll get a lot of the questions answered, when you're done, and then we can open it up to some questions and have people typically would come up and approach the mic, identify themselves. In that way, we have it for the record and also for people at home that are watching. Okay?
Fair enough.
Thank you.
If you can see, the slide number is on the right here, so if you can't, then that's, sorry, but there's a slide number here in case you want to refer back to it. So I will keep moving forward. By the way, I don't know how we could withdraw from the MBTA because we are technically an MBTA adjacent community. We are actually not one of them, and there are also MBTA rural towns. So they're not part of the MBTA system, so that's not a requirement. The requirement is that we border MBTA communities, so Beverly, Salem, others. So what we must zone for. So we have to zone, this goes back to your question a little bit earlier. We must zone for 10% of our total units in town. So right now we have about 11,800 units in town, housing units. So we need to zone for about 1,176 new units. We don't have to build anything. That's another weird thing. We just have to zone for it, meaning create a framework in the zoning bylaw and on the zoning map that would allow it if it were to be built out, but we don't need to build anything. So we need to zone for about 1,176 units with a density of at least 15 units per acre. So those are the numbers that came out of the final guidelines of the law. So right when the law was written, this actual 15 units per acre was not enumerated. Nobody knew exactly what it was. It wasn't until about a year and a half later when the final guidelines came out. So where we are is that we are an adjacent MBTA community because we don't have any transit here. If transit existed, not a bus. So even if we had a bus come through here, even if we had a new bus come through here, it would not change our status of an adjacent community. I talked with someone at the state directly about that. So that's not conjecture. So if a bus ever were to come through Danvers regularly, we wouldn't have to then zone for 20%, which is what we would have if there was a train station in town. So if there was a train station in town, it would be 20% of those. So we'd have to zone for double what we currently have. The other requirement is that it has to be at least 50 acres. The over-under here is that obviously if you zone for a larger piece of land, you're allowed to have a lower density. Just that, so that it said at least 50 acres, but it could be a lot more, for example. It kind of depends on what we would want to do in the downtown, or what we've already done in the downtown in order to tweak something rather than we don't need to start full cloth.
I just wanted to understand, of the 11,763, is the current zoning, because you referred to downtown a couple of times already, is that 1,000 units, or is that?
He's gonna go through it, so just sit tight, he's gonna explain it all. By the time he's done, you're gonna see that we already have it in place. He's gonna walk through the whole thing. We already meet it, so it's just explaining the law that's imposed on our town and all the towns in the Commonwealth that have to comply with this by the end of the year. That's why we have to have this special town meeting.
Next year, end of
End of
end
next
of
year, I'm
24.
sorry, 24,
Yep.
but we're gonna address it at this town meeting.
Right. So if we don't have a train station, then it's supposed to be in an area of concentrated development like Danvers Town Center. So town meeting adopted the Danvers Town Center and High Street zoning districts in 2020 with this law completely in mind the whole time. It was to comply. So the previous planner, some of the same planning board members went through this zoning exercise downtown in order to comply with this law. However, like I said earlier, the DHCD's final guidelines that weren't published until 2022 that included these densities. So right now, all we're trying to do is determine, get feedback on it, but we've determined what we need to do in order to comply, and there's a couple of different ways to bake that cake, and that's kind of why we're here. So so where we are right now is this is what the zoning is on the ground currently. This has the 40R, the Maple Street that's already being built. So that's this blue area here. Then you have the High Street mixed-use corridor is the green. The downtown center, the live-work area is here, and the Danvers Town Center core is here. So this is what's on the ground right now. This is our current zoning of downtown. Because this is a 40R, it's called Smart Growth District, we can't count this. We're not allowed to zone this because essentially it's already been zoned where they want it to be. So we can't count this. That is not a problem at all, however, for us. Because there's still plenty of acreage left over. There's plenty of acreage left over to have that minimum 50 acres. So you can see here, if you account everything but the blue, it's about 73 acres. If we wanted to say, no, we just want to do the minimum, we just want to do the 50 acres, no more, then that average density isn't 15 units per acre. The average density is 24 units per acre. So what we're trying to do is kind of mimic what's already there and do little changes to what's already there rather than to say you have a minimum of 24 units per acre is more than what we're doing. What we're doing right now in the downtown is portions are 20 units per acre. There's portions that are 16 units per acre, and there's portions that are 12 units per acre. Again, on the ground right now, okay? So just what we have right now, I'll go to the, so this is actually what needs to be changed in terms of, well, what are we actually gonna do to comply? It's very few numbers. So the red is what needs to be changed, and the green is what that red is going to be changed to. So I'll go through this really quickly. So as I said before, we have this multifamily building definition of 4 or more dwelling units. That has to change to 3.
Brian, just one comment. Would you be able to grab the microphone when you go over there, just for the, if possible? Thank you, sir.
I could bring it somewhat close. Okay, so we're gonna have to change the 4 to a 3. And then all the red box is gonna do is turn to the green box, means that this will be 12, and it will stay the same at 24. So, and this will go to 16, and this will stay at 24. So that we're changing 3 numbers. This is going to 3, It's good. The definition of multifamily building is going to be 3 or more units. And then this box is going to end up looking like this box. So you can do a minimum of 12 units per acre here and a minimum of 16 units per acre there. So we're not actually changing, well, we're not changing any maximums, or we wouldn't need to change any maximums to comply. And we're actually not changing any, we're changing some of the minimums, but it's changing them to others in town. So what does this actually do for us? So I just went through that just now. But what does this actually do? Like I said, the green's already compliant. The maximum density downtown is not changing. So what does this actually look like on the ground? So compared to what we have now and compared to what we possibly could have with this zoning change. So a typical lot downtown is about 1/3 of an acre. That's a standard lot downtown if you take an average. Most of them are actually around that 0.3. They're pretty tight. The current minimum units allowed is 3.66 units in some of those smaller areas, 12 units per acre. And all that's doing is saying 12 units per acre on 1/3 of an acre, how many units can you build? You can build about almost 4. With this new change, it would go up about 1 unit. So the minimum density out of all the things that we need to do, some communities need to completely rewrite their entire zoning downtown. Again, this whole thing got really, really close. Like, I know it's not, you guys aren't geeks for this and love this, but like, it's pretty amazing that the team before me was able to get this close to the density. So they were basically about 1 unit off. Not one unit per 1/3 of an acre. So like 4 units off total. So again, on average, it would be an addition of 1 unit per project would be allowed more than what would be allowed currently. So not a game changer. If anyone says this is a game changer, it's just factually not true. It's a difference of a unit, basically, per project. How many projects can happen in town? You could probably do something like, let's say 50. I don't know. It's not a ton of units that we're talking about over the course of the lifetime of downtown Danvers. So the tweaks that are going to be, the potential tweaks are just that. They're very small tweaks to the density. There are some other potential changes that are required that we're not sure of yet, that we're going to get checked on once we finish, once we actually get some more feedback from other boards and committees as well as people this evening and others, just to try to see what we can put, if anyone comes up with anything else. But outside of this, what's on the slide right now that I'm going to go through, there's no other changes that are necessary. So parts of the law relate to not being able to restrict bedroom numbers. And there's a few things that in our bylaw that relate parking to the number of bedrooms. And it's unclear based upon how strict they're going to interpret this, meaning the state, of whether or not that would comply. So anything that's kind of talking about bedroom count or limiting number of bedrooms, there's some wiggle room there that we just don't know. The other is that there's an area in the downtown zoning that's called the pedestrian frontage zone, which is basically the length of the corridor along Maple Street that basically says you have to have some type of commercial on that first floor. This zoning, the act, the Multifamily Zoning Act, basically says that you can't require commercial on the first floor. Many planners are very upset about this because we want a more vibrant downtown, and part of that is commercial entities on the first floor, storefronts, things to do, people watching, not just cafes, but more life downtown. And so a lot of people are upset about that. However, how that gets around is that, well, you can't require commercial on the first floor, but if you want commercial on the first floor, we'll give you more units. So there's like a way to get around it. But right now, we basically can't enforce a pedestrian frontage zone. We can't say you have to put commercial. The only way you can do that is if it's more than 15. So we have to, at all times, allow, if they meet these regs, 15 units per acre from the first floor up. So that's certainly a problem that a lot of towns are struggling with, and it's unclear exactly how they're going to react. So I'm going to go through the timeline right now, I believe. So right now we've achieved interim compliance because we submitted an action plan saying that we plan to comply. Planning department, senior leadership committed to pursuing this compliance, but not without feedback from boards, committees, and residents, with an eventual adoption by town meeting. This is not in stone, but I've heard the special town meeting will most likely be in January of next year. It was usually specials in the fall, but I guess, anyway, the point is that it's not in stone and that we're probably going more towards a January date than a November date. So the next steps would be to draft articles for town meeting, changing the zoning bylaw, reviewing with town council, potentially, so we're in one of these right now of 1 to 2 public meetings to elicit more feedback. We could have another one maybe towards the end of August or in September. It's kind of unclear now that we have more time for January rather than November. We can actually take a breath and maybe get some more feedback. And with the idea of us making final edits by that September, October, leading up to January. The state would review that, and then we would actually have the actual hearing for it, for a zoning hearing, probably in fall, sometime, I would guess, probably November. And then we would potentially adopt the zoning changes in January. So I was going to open it up to questions or comments or anything right now, but I think if you think it makes sense for everyone to come up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, why don't we just turn it to the board real quick?
Yep.
If I would see if there's additional questions from the board. We've already had this presentation to our board, and we've talked about it, but in light of the presentation this evening, let me just go through and see if we have further questions for Brian. Lou, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Thanks, Jim. With respect to, and so I think you clarified, Brian, my question about transit, and in terms of, so if the 465 bus were to return to Danvers Square, then that would not affect our obligations here. So it's strictly rail,
Transit station.
train station.
Yeah.
A train station, or not just a transit station? That maybe a bus serves.
Well, so they were very clear that if a bus comes through Danvers or 4 buses come through Danvers, we are an adjacent MBTA community.
Got it. Okay. And then I guess the other question I had, just in terms of the limit, so now we can no longer limit number of bedrooms. So how does that work in operation? Because I know that's also it's getting into like a building inspector issue too, in terms of code. I mean, in terms of size of bedrooms.
So size of bedrooms, the minimum size of bedroom is dictated by the International Building Code.
Right.
So that there is obviously a limit on number of bedrooms at the international, in the IBC,
Right.
which is what we use. I believe it's 200 square feet, 220 square feet, somewhere around there. Anyway, it's I wouldn't think of it as that we cannot limit bedrooms. It's that you can't, at 15 units per acre in this zone, you may not be able to essentially stop a project because there's a number of bedrooms that are there. Again, that's why there's a couple things with the law that are flexible and are unknown. And this is after me and many municipal employees talking with the state over the past 3 years. This is not like
Okay.
a new thing. So until they actually receive all of our zoning changes and do a full review of it, there's like very few things that we are in the dark about.
Okay. So in terms of, so then any sort of ancillary points too with respect to parking and that sort of thing, that's going to be sort of TBA as well?
Well, parking is fine. It was that it was related to the relationship of the number of bedrooms to the parking.
Okay.
So it wasn't so much the parking, it was the bedrooms.
Okay.
I believe it was a certain number of parking spaces per bedroom.
Okay.
And it might be as simple as saying it should be a number of parking spaces per unit.
Okay. Got it. Okay. And then I guess just sort of a final, this is more of an overarching question, because I know you mentioned earlier in terms of the repercussions if Danvers doesn't comply, and that it wouldn't take, it's not going to take a lot for us to comply based on what the work that was done, the extensive work that was done, previously. But I guess in terms of, if we, do we have anything from the state that if we, assuming we do comply, is there, I know there's like sort of a, carrot and a stick. Is there any sort of, is there anything that we will get from the Commonwealth in terms of additional services, even maybe potentially getting that bus back into downtown Danvers by doing this?
I would say no.
Okay. So just the fact that we're doing this, we'll avoid getting penalized, but will not necessarily receive a benefit.
They're viewing this as a law.
Okay. Okay. That's all I have for now.
All right, thanks, Lou. Tim?
Yeah, maybe if you don't mind going back to slide 8. I think that's the one that obviously is going to be the most important for us. So I think when you went past it. Sorry, slide 8 is 8 in my deck, but it's the one with the table. Table 18-1, that one. Thank you. So just when you describe this, I think we intuitively understand 0 goes to 12, 12 goes to 16, but maybe we could just, a little thought experiment just to make sure I understand this and the folks here understand. Right now today, you're in the DTCC zone. You'd like to build something, we'll forget about the number of units, but a multifamily building. You, by right, cannot, but by special permit, by coming in front of the planning board, you can have up to 24. If this change goes into effect, that becomes 12. Up to 12, now you don't have to come before the planning board. Between 12 and 24, you do. Is that it?
That is correct.
All right.
And then, Tim, something similar with that other, or even the other red box, that 12/24 becomes 16. That 12 number just becomes 6.
Yep.
Just increases to 16.
So the person who really wanted 14 today would have come before us, but after this, they'd be okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
And that's a per acre.
Yeah.
Okay. Jean, questions?
No questions.
All right, Tori is joining us via satellite.
I'm here. Can you hear me? Yes, we can, Tori.
Any questions, Tori?
Excellent. I don't have any questions, but I would like to ask that audience questions be made into the microphone because there are a bunch of people online and we can't hear anyone who's not speaking into a microphone.
Yep,
Thank you.
will do. My question centered on the same as Lou, just a concern over the bedrooms vis-a-vis the parking spaces, but if we're going to go by so many parking spaces per unit, have you thought about that as to what that number would be?
Yes. But I have my transportation engineer hat on, and I'm not a transportation engineer. But if you would ask a consultant, a traffic consultant, to come in and say, what should we do in a downtown like Danvers that you want to make more walkable, even though you don't have a train or a bus, the answer would probably be somewhere around 0.75 per unit as a minimum. I'm not saying I agree with that, by the way, because I do think Danvers is different simply because we're trying to create this downtown buzz, but we don't have any transit there, so we're relying on the car. So it's a little bit different, but I would imagine if you brought in a parking consultant, what would they say? Depending upon, put it this way, if we had a train or a bus, it would be 0.5 for sure, or potentially lower. That's what a traffic consultant would say if we had a train. If we had a train downtown or a real reliable bus, you're looking at 0.5 spaces per unit.
0.5 parking spaces per
0.5,
unit,
yes.
which could be a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom unit?
Yeah.
Well, this is the number of spaces total in the project. So it's assuming that some people will have one car, some people will have two cars, and some people will have no car. I'm talking again about a town that has a train or a bus. So that's where the 0.5 comes from. It's that assuming, again, some have 0, some have 1, some have 2. And if you don't, you're not going to live there. We're not Boston. We're not even a commuter rail community that we can even, try to entertain that. So they were not going to come in and say 0.5, but it'll be somewhere between 0.75 and 1 is probably what it would be.
Okay.
It's eye-opening.
Yeah, and people just need to remember that we just have to have the zoning in place. I think what we found in practice, since this zoning was passed by town meeting almost, 3 years ago, not a lot has been built. And I think one of the problems that's coming in is it's expensive. And part of that is due to the payment for affordable housing. That has to be done if you're below, is it 6 units? Is it $50,000 per unit or 7 units?
It's just net new unit, every net new unit, and then depending on the total, you eventually have to provide affordable units themselves and an associated fee at some point.
Right, but if you had just a smaller building downtown and you want to put in 6 units,
You would
you would need to come up with 300,000?
you'd probably have to do a unit. You'd probably have to provide each unit it's a big table.
Yep.
The 6 example would probably be a unit and no money.
Yeah, exactly. It would be no money. It would be 1 unit. Once you get to 6.
So if you did 5, you could pay $250
E-
instead of providing unit. Isn't 6 the line of
It's
demarcation?
35,000 per unit, but at some point you can't. That's for the fractional amount. So the idea is that some level you're not doing that, and you're just supplying a unit. You're not giving money. You're supplying a unit.
In exchange for...
No exchange.
well,
In exchange
to-
for
to
allowing
meet
it to
the
be built
require-
downtown.
To meet the requirement.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So that's another topic for another day as to,
Yeah.
the functionality of the zoning as it sits today and whether it's workable for a lot of developers, which I think, as we've seen, there hasn't been a lot of activity down there because of the cost of doing it. But for this particular meeting, and the particular purpose of this article is to comply with the state mandate. And that's what we're talking about this evening. So I don't want to go off track, but that, as Brian said, we came extremely close to accomplishing that goal. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the audience and people that are watching online. We'll go back to the live audience real quick, and then we'll do any online questions. But I would ask you to please use the microphone, identify yourself, and ask your questions through me, the chair, to Brian or to the planning board. Bill? Our biggest fan, Bill Bradstreet. He's attended every meeting, I think, that I've ever been lucky enough to attend. Brad.
Bill Bradstreet, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. 2 easy ones before I have a question. Would you introduce the board to anybody watching so that they know? I didn't hear you. My age, I could have missed it, but you didn't interview or identify the board members for
Sure.
the audience.
Yeah, I'm Jim Sears, the chairman.
Louis George, clerk.
Tim Spittle, just member.
Jean Hartnett.
Tori?
Tori Adler, participating online.
Can't really hear Tori that well. I don't know if you can help that or no. No. We got your Tori Adler is
Thank you.
participating.
The easy one, which is probably anal because that's what I am. There were pictures supplied in the packet I received. They don't identify the time period when they were taken. My age, some of them are very old, and they don't identify where the picture or the camera is painted, so that you know you're looking at Danvers Square in 1953 or when.
I think it's probably.
I would have appreciated, and I think some people, it's a nice picture, but does it belong in the Historical Society or for us to be used as a reference? The only big question I have is, how many parking spaces do we have, just parking spaces in the downtown area, let alone residents, just how many parking spaces? Because in the past, I've heard arbitrary statements made about buildings that there's plenty of parking down there. I don't know where it is. I don't know how many there are. We do have some public parking downtown, but
Right.
they're not assigned, as I know, or I think I know, that they're assigned to this building has this parking spot, this unit in this building. I don't know. That's why I'm asking. How many parking spots?
Yeah, there definitely
in
has
this
been
one?
a study of the park, and I'll turn that to staff who can
Thank
maybe address the picture, but also the parking, as part of the planning for this, the public parking spaces were considered, and I think Josh can comment on that.
Sure. There was a study, the consultant that was done in 2015, and so there's obviously been some changes downtown. But at that time, 2015, not too long ago, there was a total of 1,669 spaces that included on-street and off-street. That does not include, obviously, the Maple Square project, and the number of parking spaces off-street included in that project. But that's probably the most significant kind of that would modify that number.
So that's on-street, off-street, and that includes public parking as well?
I believe so. Yeah. I would agree. Yes.
Okay. Any idea how old the picture is out front? That looks like CVS.
I can get all that information. I'm going to go with the early 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, based on the automobiles, I would say that's probably 53 or 54.
Other questions from the audience? If you could, please just use the mic, identify yourself. Thank you.
Good evening, Jim Simon, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 7. Got a question about the 11,763, that formula that's used. There was that attachment to the email I got with all of this that was more detailed, and they gave examples on how you come up with the number for each community. And in the examples, there was another 25% that was thrown on that. So like with our 11,763, the 10% gives us the 1,176 that we need. And in that example, it said no more than 25% of multi-family units capacity. So then you could divide by another 25, or multiply by another 25%, which would bring it down to 294 units. Now, there's probably something I missed there, but it was in the examples for some, they were just throwing out fictitious numbers. So, did I miss something, or?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think so. I'm confused as well.
All right, okay, because like I said, the examples threw in another number there. It was very similar to ours. They had, I think it was 10,000 units, and was the example, and then they had that 25% that they could add in, which would bring it down significantly. So we'll look at that later, I guess.
Where does that 25%
It was,
come from?
there was that more detailed, it had all the definitions from the state, that document there. It was quite a few pages. And
I guess we're not unclear of what document you're referring to. I'm
damn it.
sorry.
Can we put that up on the, do we have that, what was sent out?
Yeah.
You got it?
Hold on.
Okay, I'm sorry.
If you have another question.
Yes. The bus station, again, in that document that you're looking for, the definition for a bus station said that it had to have a sheltered place for people to stand. So like, is that something that we're gonna have to do if we do get a bus back? Is to provide that? It's gonna take up a lot more space rather than that sidewalk on High Street that it was. I just wanna know if that's gonna be something that would be required.
Well, there's difference between a bus station, which we would probably never have, and,
Okay.
and probably bus shelter is what you're talking about.
Shelter, there you go.
Yeah, because a bus station, think
Yeah,
of,
not a-
think
yeah,
of,
not a
yeah,
station, but a
yeah.
shelter.
Yeah, you know, that's a good amenity to have if you're gonna have a bus.
Yeah, okay, and we would have to, do you think? Provide that?
I would think we would want to.
Yeah, it would be nice, okay. All right, thank you. Muster that other thing up later.
Do you want to come back to that, Brian, in a little bit? Or, okay. Other questions from the audience? Please use the mic.
Beth Swindell, Precinct 4, Maple Street. I wanted to understand of the 1,700 units that we
1,176.
1,176. So if the current projects that are approved and underway satisfy towards that,
It doesn't need to be even built. It just has to be zoned and allowed for in the zoning.
All right.
It could never be built, and we still satisfy the requirement.
I'm thinking
because we've zoned
when we
for it.
get to 1,100 and, yeah, that number, does this law is satisfied? Is it similar to 40B kind of compliance? And then the next project in this district, if someone has by right wants to turn their single family into a six-family, can they do that? Or has our town's requirement been satisfied and that kind of project would be off the deck?
So I wouldn't think about this in project-based at all. It has nothing to do with projects. Whether the project comes in or doesn't come in, we would be compliant with the law whenever town meeting passes it. Then we're compliant.
So I guess in her scenario, we've got 1,200 built. Is that going to change?
It has nothing to do with, it has nothing to do with anything.
Right, so it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's what does the zoning allow? That's all it
Okay.
should be. It should, what does the
So
zoning
the
allow?
1,100 number is just a,
That basically determines how big your district needs to be at a density. It determines the density, really. It doesn't determine anything else. We don't, again, have to build that, but it just has to, that number allows us to say it has to be more than 50 acres and it has to zone for at least 1176. That's 50 times 15. So if we wanted to, does that,
I was just wondering if every parcel in this district will then become a multifamily by right in perpetuity until.
we're already there, put it that way.
Okay,
Meaning that we are, the zoning that's on the zoning that's on right now is probably, this is rough math, so we have to zone for 1176 where we are right now, actually including the Maple Street, it's probably we're probably zoning for, I don't know, 1,000, I mean, we're right there, so, yeah.
That's probably right.
okay.
Other questions from the public audience? Questions from anyone who's joining us online? Okay, sir, if you would, please use the mic and identify yourself.
My name is Larry Peralt. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 4. I'm also on the Rail Trail Committee. I'm just wondering, if a lot more people move into town and we find that more people are using bikes and things like that, is this even a topic for me to bring up at this meeting? I'm just wondering, will there be other zoning things that would have to pass for bike lanes, of which we have none at all in the town of Danvers? So I didn't know if that's part of what we're talking about, but I just thought I'd
Well,
bring it
I
up
think
as
it
a
is
question.
part of it, because I think the trend is to encourage the use of bikes in transit, and I can let Brian address that.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it doesn't have anything to do with this law, but it certainly is top of mind for what we're trying to do at the town center to try to, if it's not, if we're not going to be getting a bus or a train, people are still going to be having to get around. And they've been doing it with a car forever, but now we have the idea is to have more people living downtown. And one of the biggest problems, it's not just payments related to affordable housing. A lot of the big problem is the fact that we have to build parking. Parking is very expensive, especially structured parking. Structured parking out here in Danvers still could be, you know, 100,000, 75,000, 100,000 per space for structured. So
But we would also have to allow for parking of bicycles, which doesn't take up anywhere, you know, the type of space required. I'm just bringing it up as you talk.
Just for a comment, Larry, in the downtown zoning, there is requirements for bicycle parking for all new projects. So. Mhm.
Other questions? The back?
Yeah, Jim Morose, Precinct 3 Town Meeting Member. Just a couple of quick questions, like, the Danvers strategic planning, so is that, does that help hinder this number we're trying to hit?
I couldn't say that it would, meaning that help or hinder. You know, that, I think, the strategic plan, I think, there's obviously a planning component in terms of our department, but I think that's a bigger question also about kind of what does town want to, how do they want to grow or not, or how do they want to grow financially, or, you know, so it's like a bigger question, but I can say that, you know, senior leadership is certainly all about making downtown a more, you know, a denser place than it is currently.
Okay, thanks. And I can understand that, I mean, really, we're not really changing anything, because we've already redeveloped this, rezoned it, so we're just tweaking this, and there's no surprises to any current landowners and whatever, so. And my only other comment is, you know, I'm just really leery of all these mandates coming down from on high down to little towns like us. And, you know, we made this one, but there are others. We got to be a little bit more careful the hoops we have to jump through and what we agree to. Thanks.
One thing on that point, Mr. Morose, that you did bring up that kind of changed my thinking a little bit when we were talking about strategic planning at the last meeting we had at the junior high school, or middle school, dating myself, Holton Richmond. But we have been talking on this board for a lot of years about looking at perhaps offering an alternative to Commercial 3 Liberty Tree Mall to add some housing down there, because the mall, as we know, isn't as strong as perhaps the Peabody Mall, and maybe give some alternatives to keep that as a vibrant. But one of the things that struck me as we were talking about this is if we did do that and offered an alternative and additional zoning for housing down there, that might cause that to be a concentrated development like the Danvers Town Center, which would require us to have more of this housing. So I kind of pulled back a little bit from that thinking, in the sense that maybe that wouldn't be a good thing, because it seems like we're really focusing a lot of attention on the downtown area, at least to have that as an area for this type of development. So, you know, we did talk a little bit about that at that strategic Danvers planning meeting, and I'm not sure when the next one is scheduled for that. Do we know, Josh?
Sorry.
Do not know.
We do not know. Sorry.
Okay. We did have some other questions. Before I get to you, to Mr. Bradstreet, sir.
Bob Gamer, Precinct 2, Town Meeting Member. Is this, and I'll throw this question out to anyone, is this the same kind of zoning that's present in Situate and Newburyport, in the downtowns of Situate and Newburyport?
No, I believe those are 40Rs. 40R is also known as a smart growth district, which is what the blue area, so a portion of our downtown essentially was a 40R. So, or is a 40R.
Yeah, I just want to add that those communities are denser, and it's profited both communities. I mean, in Situate's case, revived the economy. So their economies have benefited greatly.
Thank you. Further questions? Mr. Bradstreet?
Again, Bill Bradstreet, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. When I asked about the number of parking spots downtown, would it be possible for us to accommodate the parking needed by putting a parking garage downtown? And if so, could it be the corner of High and Park Street, or some parking lot the town controls? They could go up where they can't go out?
Are
Is
you
that
suggesting a town parking lot?
Make it multi-story? Yes, the town lot, would that satisfy the parking spots needed? Just a thought on my part.
Brian? Or Josh?
So right now, there are 8 municipal parking lots that were in the study, and it's about 830 public spots that exist currently in the downtown. If the question is, would a parking garage alleviate parking? Yeah, sure. They're very expensive. It's a question really more obviously for town meeting to determine that, not just us here. I mean, that's a very large expense.
I know money's the bottom line, but if we don't have sufficient parking in this downtown area to satisfy the need by the different businesses, aren't we defeating ourselves? That's why I'm asking if,
I think we
not
need more.
necessarily any of the smaller lots, but perhaps the lot at the corner of, as I say, Park Street and High Street. Couldn't that be made into a multi? I don't care about the cost. The cost is the cost. If we need it, we pay what it costs. Would that supply the, or satisfy the need? Just a question.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is we need more signage, not more parking. That's what I would say right now.
Right now. Okay.
More signage to let people know where to park, because we have a lot of parking. We just have a bad way, frankly, of pointing people in the right direction to where that parking is located. But we had a study in 2015. Not a lot has changed. No one from our department or a professional is going to say that there's a parking problem in terms of lack of capacity currently. Yeah.
And for example, just to tease out the point, so say, for example, someone wanted to buy the CVS building and put a couple floors on that for residential housing. That particular developer would need to show where people are going to park in combination with parking on the site, whether they put underground parking and the use of public parking.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously would have to have a parking requirement. If the question is about businesses, well, that would be great, because then we got a whole bunch of people who already live in downtown that don't need to drive to the businesses. So
I'm just trying to give an example of how the parking is a combination of private and public use.
definitely.
So that's what but we would require certain amount of that parking on the site for the particular applicant.
Of course, for all residential units, we would have to have obviously some type of parking ratio that makes sense. We would force that on the developer. We wouldn't be pushing a whole bunch of people's cars onto the streets knowingly. They need to accommodate it on site. Watch out, she's a parking expert.
Yep. We're going to get you some new signs.
Well, as a matter of fact, thanks for Kathy Simon, Precinct 7, town meeting member and downtown parking officer. For 7 years, by the way, I've been walking the beat in the square. I know every inch, I know every parking spot, and but be that as it may, I also sat on a committee. We talked about state funding for the wayfinding and how we need signage, and that's true. we do tend to do that. Not to be critical, but in this town, we have meetings and we have experts and we have consultants who come in and who will sit with us, and then we come up with a plan, and then it's never implemented. And that was signage. So my challenge to our staff would be to go back to those meeting notes or the wayfinding grant that we got for signage and maybe take a look at that. And I know we're a work in progress for parking anyway. My question is, I guess, my question is, for this particular law, why is it that we're focused in the downtown area? And you brought it up, Jim. You know, why is it because of density is a problem with parking, especially if we're going to be looking at 15 residential units per acre? That has me nervous in terms of density. And as far as parking, obviously, are we suited for that? Is that part of the plan? And I'm interested to know what our staff and our planning group has done in adapting that plan to meet these requirements.
Sure.
That's it.
So right now on the ground, we still have, right, if you look on that map there, that whole green area is at a minimum 20 units per acre right now. The red area is at 12, and the orange is at 16. So we're certainly right around 15, and we're more than that in 2 of the 3 right now. We're trying to spread it out across those 3 so that all 3 of them get slightly more. In terms of why are we focusing on the downtown? So the only thing I can say about this is that when 2020, when this zoning was passed, there was several different studies that were done in terms of what the downtown could or should be. I couldn't tell you that it was, thousands of people participating from the community to make that happen. It did go to town meeting and it passed overwhelmingly. So in terms of why downtown, I would probably venture to say that it was presented to town meeting, and town meeting said, okay, we should have some more density in the downtown. All we're doing now is just kind of, you saw it. It's about a difference of a unit per project in terms of the change. But why downtown? I was not here in 2020, but they must have made a good presentation.
Yes and no. If I could add one thing, the other thing that made me nervous that you said had to do with sometimes when developers will come in and there is an ample conditions for the variances they are requesting. You said if you put commercial on the first floor, then maybe we'll let you add more to the above. So
That's what we do right now.
I understand that, and that's why we always have so many variances requested of our downtown projects, particularly for residential. I'd love to see more commercial in the square, and I'm hoping that our planning department focuses more on that than on residential in the square.
So that's actually a good point, because one idea that we could do that's not on the table at the moment, or everything's kind of on the table, but in terms of that's not really talked about, is that we could say, so it just has to be 15 units per acre on average. So what we're doing is, saying, oh, a little denser over in the green area. No, that's already towards 20 anyway. But what you could do is we could still say that you get a lower percentage if you're doing residential only. So you get less units if you're doing residential only, but if you put commercial on the first floor, we will allow it. So that's currently where it is right now. We could do that on this tweak, but then the densities are, they're going to be a little bit different, and it's possible that those higher densities are maybe not what everybody wants. I don't know, but there's a way to dial this in. And that's kind of what tonight was to be about, to figure out, one, how much how engaged is the community, which is, again, it's great that people are here, but we want to hear those things. What can we dial up in some places or dial down in others to make this work? So what I'm hearing from you is that you'd rather dial up the density, keep the average density the same, meaning that we're still zoning for 1176, but if you're going to put commercial, you could do a little bit more, and if you do residential, maybe do a little bit less. Is that an idea?
It's an idea.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bates?
And then you can because it's still average.
Thank you. Bill Bates, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 4. And I want to just start by thanking you folks for all the hours you put in on our behalf. It is really appreciated. And staff being here to answer the tough questions. I just wanted to share that I was in downtown Danvers at 8 o'clock last Saturday night, and it looked like somebody rolled up the sidewalks. I was in a couple of the businesses. They were dead. One had a band going with 9 people there to watch the band. I think what we did, and I was on that committee what we did in 2020 in rezoning that downtown, we wanted to see more residential downtown. Because guess what? The commercial isn't there anymore. People work from home, they shop from home. So we're not being realistic if we think that we're going to have more commercial and less residential. And I didn't see last Saturday at 8 o'clock any problem parking downtown Danvers. It was empty. Thank you.
Further questions? Further questions from the online audience? Questions from the board? Mr. Zubrick in the back? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. While he's walking up, Jean's got a quick comment.
This question is maybe for Brian or Josh. I know when you presented to the board in May, we had talked about doing a placemaking study sort of for the downtown to try and get more like people down there. So has anything come of that, or have you thought about more about a placemaking study?
So we have not made movement on looking for funding for that. I think that so the planning department and strategic Danvers, we talk sometimes, but we are not, like, it's not our baby. But that is something that we could bring up to leadership about using, because there's a lot of feedback that they're receiving, and we could focus on that. We could focus on downtown on one of those sessions. But in short, no, we have not pursued any funding for those.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Zubrick?
Thank you. I may be coming from a different perspective, and I think you've heard some of my comments in the beginning. But my reason for coming to this meeting today was a multifamily zoning requirement for the MBTA communities. Now, it's great that we have accomplished some of the criteria that this new law that has been passed have been incorporated into our zoning, because we went through hell for 3 years negotiating that zoning change. A lot of input came from the business community, from the residents, and the planning board had a very interesting exercise to go through that. It was approved by town meeting, but now all of a sudden we're getting this new law requires that the MBTA communities shall have at least one zoning district or reasonable size in the multifamily housing as permitted as of right, and meets other criteria set forth by statute. Now, What I've heard from the planning department is that this was already in the back of their mind when this zoning was passed. That's great. But why are we rolling over in regards to this dictate that's coming from the state legislature? This is a law that was passed probably in the middle of the night without any input from Danvers. I don't know if you had any input into this law. I know I haven't. But the thing is that what we're doing is we're complying with something that's being driven down to the communities because the state believes that we have a housing crisis. Well, let the state resolve the crisis. Leave Danvers alone because Danvers has its own culture and its own resemblance of what it looks like. I understand, Bill, that at night this place rolls the sidewalks up, and which is great in a way. But do we want to have a nightclub on every corner in downtown Danvers and then have 3 stories of housing above that? I don't think so. I think we went through that pain. And that law was, the zoning was passed with some resistance. Don't say it's overwhelmingly, because by the time it got to town meeting, it was passed, but it was not 100%. So that's my concern, and I'm just coming from the perspective that I hate to have the state legislature dictating this to us, where we already took steps to develop housing downtown. When is this going to stop? So that's my major comment. Thank you. But I really don't know why this article that I've obtained is all about MBTA. We do not have any bus service in this town. We do not have any structures from the MBTA. And we are a bedroom community that relies on vehicles. So I don't know what's going to happen, but this thing is being driven by the MBTA, and it's a false pretense. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, comments? Anything else for staff?
I did find, so it was, what I'd sent out was a link from the state. So I'm going to bring it up. Was this the one that you were referencing? It had to do with the last column, number of districts, percent of district to be located in the station area. Is this what you were talking about?
No, there was actually,
Because I sent around a website. It wasn't.
Yes.
It wasn't a PDF. It was just it was a website explaining what is an MB, the multifamily zoning requirement. Because the only thing I ever sent out was this link and a PDF of the presentation, or a presentation.
that was, might have been the. Yeah.
The 25% rule is I can do that, but that's not a benefit. I'll show you what that is. So here. It's in one of the asterisks, but so in the first asterisk, which is the minimum multifamily unit capacity. So ours is 1,176 based on 10%, okay? What this says is that the minimum multifamily unit capacity for most communities is based upon the 2020 housing stock, the 1176 number. In some cases, the minimum unit capacity is derived from an extrapolation of that. So it's not a real number. If Then the 15 units, it says, in cases where the required unit capacity from these extrapolation exceeds 25%, then you can cap it at 25. The idea, it's not a benefit. It's more of if you happen to not have an accurate, if it's extrapolated, if the number here, the 2020 housing units is extrapolated and not an actual number, then it could potentially make it more. And if it ever exceeds 25%, it will be capped at 25%. So it does not, we don't have that, and we certainly don't want 25%. We're sticking at 10%. It's the percent of total units that we have to zone for.
Okay, and that's not what I was actually looking at.
Okay.
But it was something else, and I'll dig it up, and I can see you tomorrow with that.
Sounds good.
Because it gave a couple of examples, and it brought it down to like that 200, 294, so.
All right.
But there might be some caveat there, I'm sure there is, that I didn't understand. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much for digging that up.
One second, Lou had a question.
Yeah, just a question, and this is just, I was just thinking about, just picking up on what Kathy Simon had brought up and just mentioning about sort of the residential versus commercial mix. And in terms of what is the, and I think it does make sense to maybe take a look to see if there's anything that we can do differently in terms of densities, but is there I mean, in terms of, from sort of a planning perspective, is at least currently, is there sort of an ideal that's typically for downtown such as Danvers, which is, it's true, it's not like the days of old. We don't have Almies there anymore. You don't have it's going to be different. It's going to be more convenience places as well as restaurants and such too. And I know that, and not to, and not to go and contradict what Bill Bates had said, but Saturday night was very. I think it was raining a lot, so I don't think there were as many people. There were more people on Sunday downtown, but it's still. Sometimes it does. The sidewalks do roll up a bit, and so is there sort of an ideal mix?
I mean, there always is. First of
Right.
all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, realistically, I think it makes more sense to have more commercial on the first floor and incent that. Incentivize, to allow for more, but still keeping the overall density the same. Meaning, so what we can do is we dial up like one of the, we could dial up one of the cores and then dial down another core. So we could do that.
Sure.
If there is, so that's something that we can play with.
Okay.
Again, that's, that's a real thing that we heard this evening that we can do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's a question in the back?
Mike Shannon, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 5, through the chair to Brian. Earlier, you talked about if we were not in compliance with this, that we would not be able to access certain grants and other programs, and kudos to your department for having the foresight to act on the interim compliance and bring in $110,000.
Just, I gotta stop you. We haven't brought it in yet.
Well, hopefully it's on its way. And you also said that if we are in compliance, we really don't get a benefit when asked. But I don't look at it that way. If we're in compliance, I'm going to ask you, what does your department plan on doing with that compliance? Because now we have access to those grant programs and other things. So I guess I'd ask you for a commitment from your department, any other department that it applies to, that you would, in some robust fashion, take advantage of those programs to the benefit of Danvers if it's appropriate and applicable.
That's an easy one. I'm gonna apply to the one-stop application every year I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you say more about what that is?
Sure. So the one-stop takes into account, I believe, 8 different grant programs at the state level. And they're up on the board right now in terms of what they can be used for. So we can do design and implementation of complete streets. So we could, someone was talking about bike lanes in the town center, bike parking, those types of things. Corridor studies, so like Endicott Street, we could use funding to study that corridor. Wayfinding, we were talking about that. Again, bike and pedestrian plans. Economic development studies also was talked about this evening. So these are a lot of things that are real, that there's no doubt that we could use, that we haven't applied for in the past, where we could have. Before this law was enacted, we obviously could have applied to all of these. But we applied for the first time, I believe it was in May.
Great, thank you. Further questions? Hearing none. Anything else from staff?
Yeah, we don't have the next meeting planned. We wanted to see, one, how many people will come, how much feedback we get, but I think it would be nice to have one more meeting. I'm not gonna be bombarding town meeting, with a whole bunch of emails, but it'll probably be like, we're having one meeting, and then like a few days before, I'll say we're gonna have, just a reminder. But I think the goal is maybe to have one in September. But I think either way, there's going to be kind of a download email, meaning that if anyone has any questions or comments, you can always email me, and I can talk with you. We can do it through email or whatever. But if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to stop by or give me a call.
Just on that note, I know we've got some meetings coming up for the planning board. Would we want to, in light of the fact that we've kind of teased out a lot of the concerns, at least from this group, maybe add it to our agenda of a regularly scheduled meeting? Because we do have a few coming up, instead of having a separate night, perhaps.
I think that makes sense, yeah.
So what do we have, Josh, if you could, on the next dates?
Yeah, so I believe I sent an email out to the group yesterday. The 152 Endicott Street application was continued to the second September meeting on September 26th.
Mhm.
So as we speak right now, at this moment, that's our only application that for any upcoming meetings is that September 26th.
So it looks like we're definitely not going to be having a November meeting. So it looks like our town meeting, that is. So we're looking more toward
It appears that way.
early
Yeah.
January,
The-
maybe?
The rumblings are January.
Okay, so that'll help us on a few fronts. Okay, so it looks like the next time we would meet, we could put this with our, would you want to do it before or after that presentation? Because that could be rather lengthy.
It probably might make sense maybe after, but if Brian had a different idea,
Doesn't matter to me.
maybe that first October meeting, and it's hard to say.
Well, I meant in the same night.
Oh, yeah.
You want to do it on the same night?
I'm not sure. I feel like that might be that could be a moderately long conversation, just because of the traffic peer review staff will likely be in attendance. But I would defer to you, and Ryan's here also. I'd be interested what the board, the will of the board on that one, but.
Are you talking September or? What's the board think as far as the next date for this meeting? If we do it on we don't have anything else in August. We're only meeting once in August.
Yeah, right now, at the August 22nd meeting, there's nothing on that meeting.
Is there anything we could get on the agenda on September 12th? Because I know that originally we were looking at Endicott Street on September 12th. So
Not
if there's
that I'm aware of at this moment.
not even anything administrative or anything?
Not at this moment, no.
Because then we could have this discussion continued on the 12th unless that's too early.
I think the 12th is good.
The 12th might be.
I think the 12th is good.
So I guess what would be on the agenda? We're just going to present to perhaps
Well,
people that didn't make it this evening, or what's the goal of the next meeting?
Well, it's possible we could have a little bit more information from the state. I'm not really ready to submit like a full package to the state saying that this is what we're introducing to town meeting. I'm not ready to do that. So it would basically be, I think that what we're looking at is another opportunity for people who couldn't make it this time. I don't really know, but I probably won't have a ton by the 12th, actually. Unless the idea is like round 2 for people who couldn't make it.
Would it
Okay.
would it make sense maybe the like first meeting of October, then after maybe that September 26th, and if 152 got continued, then it would continue to that first October, and then we could also have this conversation. We'd probably have a little bit more, potentially more feedback from the state, and then also maybe we could flush out that what I take away, one of the bigger items from tonight is if we wanted to incentivize the mixed use, so we'd have commercial on the first floor a little bit more. We could kind of present what those numbers would look like, and
Okay. So what's the first meeting in October? The date,
10.
why isn't allowing me to go down?
I'm not here.
the 10th? 10/10?
There might be on that meeting, there might be a staff conflict.
Could you make it?
I could be here, but Brian won't be here, but
Okay.
we could talk about it.
Maybe we should talk about this offline.
Okay. No, I was just trying to,
Yeah.
so, all right, so we're going to schedule an upcoming meeting to address this again between staff and the planning board. We'll schedule a meeting for that. If there are further questions, I'd ask you to email Brian or Josh and those who are online as well, so we can kind of, get as much information out before we get this in the public meeting stage with the FinCom and getting it ready for a town meeting vote.
Right. No matter what, there will have to be a public hearing with the planning board on this topic. So
Guaranteed one more meeting.
there's at least guaranteed one more meeting.
Okay. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
So moved?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you for your attendance and your attention.